At the reading of the will, my daughter-in-law smiled as if she had already won. "You will never touch that money again, Martha," she whispered. My son stayed silent, as always. I simply placed my folder on the table. The judge opened it, read 2 lines, and gave a dry laugh. Then he said, "Oh, this changes everything." Deanna started packing my coffee mugs into a cardboard box, claiming she needed the shelf space for her matcha bowls. It had only been 2 weeks since I buried my husband, Arthur, and there was my son, Julian, just standing by watching. "It looks so much more modern this way, Martha," my daughter-in-law chirped, wiping down the countertops I'd meticulously cared for 20 years. They claimed they moved in to help me through the hard times, but help didn't feel like this. I took a slow breath, feeling the cool marble under my fingertips, and I didn't cry. I was 68, not a piece of fine china. Maybe I'd protected Julian too much over the years, raised him to be too soft. Seeing him avoid my gaze while staring at his phone, I realized that was my own mistake staring me in the face. Deanna was already moving on to the next cabinet, claiming territory I was giving up without a fight, at least for now. I didn't argue about the mugs. I just picked up the box, carried it silently to my bedroom, and took my coffee maker with me. If she wanted to rule the kitchen, fine. But I wasn't drinking my morning brew out of a bowl. That night at dinner, Deanna talked non-stop about the future, renovations, paint swatches, and how much cash they could pocket by selling Arthur's old truck. She didn't use words like if. She spoke as if the house already belonged to her. Julian just nodded between mouthfuls of food, looking exactly like the teenager who used to wait for everyone else to make his decisions for him. I ate my toast in silence. They thought I was just a grieving widow, grateful for any company, even the overbearing kind. But grief doesn't make you blind. When Deanna suggested we transfer the joint household account, the one I funded monthly for groceries, into her name, I set my fork down very quietly. The first test had begun, and I wasn't about to fail it. The next morning, I headed straight to the bank. Deanna hadn't brought up the account again after dinner, but the suggestion alone was all the warning I needed. For years, I'd kept an automatic transfer running to help Julian out, a relic from his college days that I'd kept active out of habit and motherly instinct. It was my fault. I'd made him dependent. I sat across from the bank manager and canceled that transfer without a second thought. Then I opened a separate private account for my pension and Arthur's life insurance. I left exactly enough in the family account for a week's worth of groceries. Not a penny more. When I got home, Deanna was waiting in the hallway, holding a receipt and looking annoyed. "Martha, my card got declined at the furniture store. Did you do something to the account? I was trying to order that new rug for the living room." I took off my coat, hung it neatly on its hanger, and turned to face her. "That account is for groceries," I said calmly. "Not rugs." She crossed her arms. "Julian and I thought we'd modernize the place. We all live here now, we have to be flexible. If you want to modernize, you'll have to do it with your own money," I replied, walking past her into the kitchen. Julian came home shortly after. Deanna ambushed him at the door with a sharp, hushed voice. I heard every word. She called me stubborn and difficult. Julian walked into the kitchen with his shoulders slumped, stammering about whether there was a problem with the bank. I looked at my son, a grown man sending his wife in to do his dirty work, hoping I'd just cave like I always did. "There's no problem," I said, pouring a glass of water. "The money is exactly where it belongs." Julian looked like he wanted to argue, but he stayed silent. The real storm, however, was just starting to brew. The next boundary was crossed on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was reading in the living room when I heard the front door unlock. It wasn't Julian, and it wasn't Deanna. A woman I barely knew stepped into the hall, shaking out a wet umbrella. It was Deanna's mother, Brenda. "Oh, hi, Martha," she said airily, as if walking into someone else's house, unannounced, was perfectly normal. Deanna gave me a key. She wanted me to check on things while they're at work. I felt my muscles tense. My daughter-in-law had given away my late husband's key without even asking. It wasn't an oversight. It was a power move. I was partially to blame. I'd left the spare keys on the entryway table. "Hello, Brenda," I said, polite, but ice cold. "That won't be necessary. I'm almost always home." Brenda just waved me off, headed to the kitchen, and started poking around the fridge. I didn't kick her out. I didn't make a scene. I waited until she left an hour later, then I picked up the phone and called a locksmith. The next morning, while Julian and Deanna were at work, I had the deadbolts replaced. When they got home that evening, they were stuck in the rain. I opened the door for them, and Deanna stormed in fuming. "What is this? My key won't work." I changed the locks. I explained, matter-of-factly handing Julian exactly one new key. "Security reasons. Brenda surprised me yesterday, and I'd like to know exactly who has access to my home." Deanna's face turned a bright, angry red. "You can't just change the locks. This is our home too." "It is my house," I said softly. "You are guests here to help me. Did you forget that?" Julian looked at the floor, ashamed. He knew I was right, but he didn't dare cross Deanna. She snatched the key from his hand and stomped upstairs. The lines were drawn, but the real battle over the estate was still looming. Arthur's workshop in the garage was a place I'd avoided since he passed. It still smelled like motor oil and cedar. I knew I'd have to deal with it eventually, but I wanted time. Deanna had other plans. On a Saturday morning, I heard banging outside. I walked out to find Julian loading Arthur's expensive power tools into plastic bins. Deanna stood there with a clipboard directing him like a foreman. "What are you doing?" I asked, pulling my cardigan tighter. Deanna gave me that thin, practical smile. "We're clearing space, Martha. I need the room for my online boutique inventory. This old stuff is just collecting dust." Julian gave me a fleeting apologetic look, but his hands kept moving. In the past, I would have sighed and let it happen just to keep the peace. I'd spent a lifetime making things easy for Julian, but not today. I stepped forward, took the bin out of Julian's hands, and set it firmly on the pavement. "Put it all back. Now." My voice didn't leave room for debate. Deanna rolled her eyes. "Martha, be reasonable. Arthur is gone. He doesn't need this. We have to think practically." "Thinking practically doesn't mean deciding things behind my back," I countered. I shut the bin and pushed it back into the garage. I turned to Julian. "You do not touch your father's things until I say so. Is that clear?" He nodded dumbly and stepped back. Deanna scoffed. I pulled the garage door shut, locked it, and put the key in my pocket. The next day, I called a local tool dealer. I sold Arthur's equipment myself and put the $8,000 straight into my new private account. If the space was going to be cleared, it was going to be on my terms. Deanna seethed when she saw the empty garage, but she didn't say a word. She was waiting for the big day, the day the will was read. The atmosphere in the house turned frozen over the next few weeks. Deanna only spoke to me when absolutely necessary. Julian avoided me entirely, burying himself in overtime and sitting silently in front of the TV at night. I watched it all from a distance. I realized now that Deanna wasn't evil, she was just incredibly calculating. And Julian was too lazy to take responsibility. I spent an afternoon at the dining table with 10 years of bank statements. It was painful to see how often I'd bailed Julian out, car repairs, vacations, security deposits. I'd done it because I thought that's what a good mom does. In reality, I'd taught him that his actions had no consequences. Deanna had seen that weakness and exploited it. I wrote a letter. It was professional and precise. No tears, no emotional pleas, just facts. I listed every gift I'd given them and officially stated that all financial support was being cut off effective immediately. I also drafted a simple rental agreement. If they wanted to stay in my house, they'd be paying $1,800 a month starting next month. I put everything in a clean folder. Deanna was acting strangely confident. I'd hear her on the phone with friends bragging about upcoming vacations and how their financial situation was about to drastically improve. She assumed Arthur had left the bulk of his cash to Julian. But Arthur and I had a sweetheart will, the survivor gets everything. Julian was only the secondary beneficiary. Deanna had never bothered with the details. She just saw the big house and the savings account. I let her believe what she wanted. I fixed my dinner and listened to her fantasies. The court appointment was only 2 days away. I was ready for the curtain to fall on this farce. The night before our appointment at the courthouse, Deanna was in an unnervingly good mood. She opened a bottle of wine and poured a heavy glass for Julian. She didn't offer me one. I sat in my armchair with my tea pretending to read. "You know, Julian," Deanna said loud enough for me to hear, "with the inheritance we can finally finish the attic. And we should probably talk about Martha's allowance. She doesn't really need much anymore." Julian cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. "Let's just wait until tomorrow, Deanna. Now's not the time." I turned a page. I wasn't even angry anymore. I just felt a deep pity for my son. He'd found a woman who made his decisions for him just like I used to. That was the hard truth I had to swallow. I wasn't just a victim here. I'd laid the groundwork. Before bed, I logged onto my laptop. I canceled the insurance on Julian's car, which had been in my name for 5 years. I removed them from my family cell phone plan. If Deanna wanted control, she could have the bills that came with it. I packed my folder. It sat ready on my nightstand. I slept remarkably well that night, no tossing, no turning. The next morning, I dressed, simply drank coffee from my own machine in my room, and met them in the hall. They were dressed to the nines. Deanna was wearing an expensive new dress she'd clearly bought on credit in anticipation of the payday. "Ready?" she asked impatiently, jingling her car keys. "I have an appointment at the interior design studio this afternoon." "I'm ready," I said quietly. The room at the probate court was cold and sterile. The judge, an older man with a sharp gaze, sat behind a heavy desk. Deanna sat bolt upright, legs crossed, wearing a smug smile. Julian looked pale, staring at his hands. The judge cleared his throat and opened the file. Before he could start, Deanna leaned over to Julian and whispered loud enough for me to hear, "You're never going to touch this money again, Martha." Julian just gave a weak nod. The judge began reading. It didn't take long. "We hereby designate each other as sole and unrestricted heirs." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Deanna froze. Her smile vanished instantly. "What does that mean my husband gets nothing?" "The son is the contingent beneficiary," the judge explained calmly. "As of now, the entire estate passes to the spouse." Deanna turned ghostly white. That's when I opened my folder. I pulled out my letter and handed it to the judge. "Excuse me. Your Honor, I'd like to submit this for the record. It's a formal declaration that I am ceasing all voluntary financial support for my son and daughter-in-law." The judge took the paper and scanned the list of canceled insurance policies, stop transfers, and phone bills. He looked up, read it again, and then something unexpected happened. He laughed. It was a short, dry chuckle, but he muttered, "Well, that certainly simplifies things." Deanna gasped. "You can't do that," she screamed, staring at me. "You can't just cut us off. I already have," I said, standing up. Julian looked at me completely shattered. "Mom, why?" "Because I'm done being your ATM," I replied without a hint of bitterness. "I believe we're done here." I gave the judge a polite nod, turned my back, and walked out. The look of pure shock on their faces was the only closure I ever needed. The car ride back felt like a trip in a hearse. Deanna stared out the window, fuming, while Julian gripped the steering wheel like it was a life raft. I sat in the back and enjoyed the silence. The second we got inside, Deanna lost it. She threw her purse on the floor and spun on me. "This is a joke, right? You're just going to dump us after everything we've done for you." I took off my coat. "What exactly have you done?" Deanna organized my mugs, rearranged my furniture. I reached into my bag and pulled out the rental agreement. I laid it on the kitchen table. "This is a standard lease. The rent is fair market value for this neighborhood. If you're staying, you sign this. If not, you have 30 days to find a new place." Julian stared at the paper like it was radioactive. "Mom, you're charging us rent. In my own house." "It's my house, Julian," I corrected him gently. "And yes, I am. You're adults. You wanted the control. Now you get the responsibility." Deanna let out a hysterical laugh. "I'm not signing that. Never. You're just a bitter, greedy old woman." "Then pack your bags," I said, my voice steady. I didn't feel like arguing anymore. I'd been quiet long enough, and I'd paid enough. "Julian, say something," Deanna shrieked. My son looked from his wife to me. In that moment, he looked like a little boy waiting to be rescued. But I didn't reach out. "Deanna's right," Julian said quietly. "We're not signing that." I just nodded. "Fine. Then your 30 days start today." I grabbed a glass of water and went to my room. I locked the door, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel a shred of guilt. Just a massive, weightless sense of relief. The next month was a total war of nerves, but I stuck to my guns. I only bought groceries for myself. If the toilet paper ran out, I bought a roll and kept it in my room. I only cleaned my own space. Julian tried to talk to me twice. He'd stand in the kitchen, shuffling his feet, talking about how family is supposed to stick together. I looked him in the eye and said, "I raised you to be a man who runs away from hard things, Julian. I'm sorry for that, but I won't fund it anymore. You have to learn to walk on your own." He left without another word. Deanna tried passive aggressiveness. She'd leave trash out or park her car so it blocked mine. I didn't give her the satisfaction of an emotional reaction. I moved the trash to her bedroom door, and when the car was blocked, I just called an Uber. Every provocation hit a brick wall because I stopped giving her a target. Without my money, they realized very quickly how expensive their lifestyle actually was. The insurance companies sent notices. Their phones got cut off. By the middle of the second month, they were packing boxes. They'd found a cramped apartment on the edge of town. It definitely wasn't the luxury Deanna had envisioned. On moving day, I stood in the garden, pruning my roses. I didn't help them carry a single box. Deanna marched past me one last time, head held high, refusing to look at me. Julian lingered for a second. He looked exhausted. "Mom, we'll call you." "Take care of yourself, Julian," I said. I didn't throw any insults. I didn't need a big dramatic goodbye. As the moving truck pulled away, I set down my shears. I went inside, breathed in the air, which suddenly felt a lot cleaner, and shut the front door. I turned the key twice. The house was mine again. In the weeks after they left, I reclaimed my life. I put the kitchen back exactly the way I liked it. The old coffee mugs came out of the bedroom and back onto the shelves. I sold Arthur's gas-guzzling truck and bought a little hybrid. I even rented out the garage to a neighbor for storage, which gave me some nice extra mad money. The house was quiet, but it was a good, healing kind of quiet. No heavy footsteps on the stairs, no snide comments at dinner, no uninvited guests letting themselves in. I learned to accept my own mistakes. I hadn't been a perfect mother. My overprotectiveness had made Julian weak, and my kindness had given Deanna an opening. But I'd fixed it. I'd drawn a hard line and learned that true love means setting boundaries even when it hurts. My contact with Julian is sparse now. Every once in a while, I'll get a text about the weather. I don't push for more. If he's ever ready to have a real relationship as an adult, without looking for a handout, my door will be open. But only then. Last Sunday, I had my old friend Sarah over for coffee. We sat in the garden, drinking out of my favorite mugs and just catching up. "You look good, Martha," Sarah said, smiling. "A lot more relaxed." "I am relaxed," I said, and I meant it. I leaned back in my chair and looked at my home. No one was taking up my space anymore. No one was forcing their rules on me. The click of that new lock on the front door wasn't just a sound to me anymore. It was the sound of my own life. I didn't need lawyers or big dramas. I just stopped playing the game. The control was back in my hands, exactly where it belonged. For the first time in a long time, I was finally home.